I thought since we were going through the full faction pack reviews in AOS, it might be a fun idea to give some of the 40k armies their own slice of the fun, and so we're going to be starting a new series of full 40k army reviews with their respective updates and codexes. And whilst obviously there is a lot to go through, I thought we would start off things with one of the smaller, simpler ones, just to see how it plays out with you guys and whether you like it. And so with that in mind, we're going to start with one of the few remaining indexes for 10th edition, and that is the Black Templars. So today we're going to be taking a look at their unique rules, abilities, their stratagems, and their datasheets, and going through them all one by one. Obviously, being Space Marines, the Black Templars do get the main Marine army rule of Oath of Moment, giving them the option to pick an enemy unit in your command phase, and then until your next command phase, you get full rerolls to hit against that target. It is just all round a really strong rule, despite being nerfed from how it was at the beginning of 10th edition, and it does affect both shooting and melee, so you can move up, shoot, and still charge in and be re-rolling all of those hit rolls. And with Black Templars especially being very melee focused, this does bring a lot to their damage output. But on top of that though, the Black Templars also have some unique limitations in their army. The army is unable to take any Psyker models because lore-wise the Black Templars hate Psykers. And then they also have their own unique keyworded vehicles in the form of the Gladiator Lancer, Reaper Valiant, and also the Impulsor, the Repulsor, and the Repulsor Executioner. And that's because they get some small additions and are a tiny bit pricier compared to the vanilla versions. So you can't bring those generic Marine versions of those vehicles, you do have to bring your own special unique ones. In terms of the detachment rules for the Templars though, you get what is a really good one in my opinion with Templar vows. And I think this is just really strong because it gets you one of 4 buffs, all of which are quite good in their own right, but crucially you get to pick which one you want at the start of the first battle round. So after you have seen the enemy army, so you know if they've got a load of vehicles or a load of infantry or they are very psyker heavy, so you really can cater your army to exactly what you need to help best defeat the opponent. The options you get are Suffer Not the Unclean to Live, which gives your Astartes units lethal hits on their melee weapons, Uphold the Honor of the Emperor, which gives your units a 6-up Feel No Pain and a slightly better leadership of 5+. Abhor the Witch, Destroy the Witch nets you an army-wide 4-up invuln against psychic attacks, and also the anti-psyker 4+ rule on your melee weapons. And then finally, Accept Any Challenge No Matter the Odds gives your melee weapons the Sustained Hits 1 rule. Now, as I said, all of these I think are really strong. Making yourself better against swarms of infantry or against heavy vehicles and tanks with either sustained or lethal hits is of course just brilliant. The anti-psyker rule is arguably the most niche, but if you find yourself facing off against the Eldari or the Tyranids or Thousand Suns, that one could in some cases pretty much auto win you the game right off the bat. I would say the most generically always useful one is the 6-up Feel No Pain from Uphold the Honor of the Emperor. It's not super flashy and you may think that a 6-up Feel No Pain isn't amazing, but I personally really like it. I think on things like your 2 wound 3-up save Marines, it does go a long way, making you much more resilient to of course 1 damage weapons, but also essentially giving you a 30% chance to survive those very common 2 damage attacks compared to another army's Marines that may not have that Feel No Pain. So you really are going to be sticking around quite a bit longer than other chapters Marines are. And of course on things like your tanks and dreadnoughts, it's just going to make them even more durable. So it is just all around a really flexible, strong, flavorful detachment rule that I also think ties in really well with the Marine Army rule to get the most out of those rerolls if you are going for the sustained or lethal hits options to get the most 6s you possibly can. Of course, as we've seen in all the other 40k indexes and codexes, there is a list of stratagems and also enhancements to pick from. The stratagems for the Black Templars come in the form of 6, which are all 1 command point. And first up, we have Fervent Acclamation. This lets you pick a character in your army, and he and his unit get the benefit of a vow that hasn't been picked for your army until your next command phase. So if you've gone for, say, the 6-up Feel No Pain, but you are about to charge into a massive unit of Orc Boys, you could go for the Sustained Hits 1 on that unit and just really dish out a huge amount of damage into your opponent for that turn. For 1 CP, I really like the extra flexibility it can add to your units, and it does really mean that you have at least one unit in your army that can deal with pretty much any situation in the game you come up against. The Devout Push is next, and this is done in your opponent's shooting phase after they have shot. You can pick a unit of yours that has had one or more models destroyed as a result of those enemy attacks, and you can make a normal move up to d6 inches, but you have to move towards that enemy unit that shot them. Now, it gets better if you have the Abhor the Witch vow. That lets you make a flat 6-inch move, but then you have to move towards either the unit that shot you or towards the closest Psyche unit. So this really will let you, for 1 CP, get up the board much quicker and make it much easier for you to get close and lock down enemy units and potentially get an easier charge off in your subsequent turn. So again, a really nice little mobility tool for a nice cheap 1 command point. No Escape is again in your opponent's turn, this time in their movement phase, and it's done when an enemy unit that isn't a monster or a vehicle chooses to fall back. You can then roll a d6, and on a 4+, that enemy can't fall back and has to remain stationary. So again, a really nice way to pin and lock down an enemy that may not want to be in combat with you. You do also get to add 1 to the roll if you have picked the Accept Any Challenge No Matter the Odds vow, so you are much more likely to get that off. But even if it doesn't, then if an enemy does choose to fall back, so if you don't get this stratagem off, if you don't roll the 4+, when they do choose to fall back, they do still have to make a Desperate Escape test. So even if you fail the roll, it is still a bit of a deterrent to making enemies falling back, and you can potentially kill off a couple of enemy models if they do decide to try and get away from your combat range and they don't want to fight you. Armor of Contempt also returns, as it does for all Marine books, giving you some more durability against enemy attacks by worsening their AP in either the shooting or the fight phase by 1. This is, as always, just a brilliant stratagem to have. It gives you so much more durability with your 3-up save and potentially 6-up Feel No Pain as well. And it can make even things like your regular intercessors just absurdly durable into the enemy. Crusader's Wrath is next. This is done in the fight phase. You get +1 to your armor penetration for the phase, and in a melee focused army like yours, this just makes your close combat insanely good. Again, it is a fantastic combo with things like your sustained or lethal hit options, and of course Oath of Moment from your army rule. It really will just let you cut through hordes or tougher things like vehicles with so much ease, thanks to the rerolls and the bonus AP. Putting things like even chainswords onto -2 AP is huge, and it is a huge force multiplier into essentially any enemy unit that you may come across in 10th edition. Again, like some of the other stratagems, it gets a nice buff with a certain vow. This one, if you've gone for Suffer Not to the Unclean to Live, you also get +1 strength on your melee attacks too. So making things like your lethal hits that don't manage to auto wound by rolling a 6, just potentially wounding anyway a little bit easier, can mean you can just push through an extra few wounds, although I would say the extra AP is the really big win from this stratagem. The final one is Vicious Riposte. This is again in the fight phase, but it's after an enemy unit has selected its target. You can pick one of your units that was a target picked, and until the end of the phase, you get to roll a dice when a model in your unit is destroyed, and on a 4+, they can fight before you remove them. So you just get to make the absolute most out of your units and give them a chance to do some damage back into the enemy before you take them off the board. Again, you're getting a nice buff with a specific vow. This one is Uphold the Honor of the Emperor, so your guys will already have that 6-up Feel No Pain to protect them from dying, but then when they do, they will get to potentially fight back. In this vow, you get +1 to the dice result, so essentially you will be fighting on death on a 3+, which on something like your Sword Brethren is a fantastic way to punish an enemy unit that is fighting into you. So there really are some very, very good stratagems in this army. There's plenty to help keep you alive a bit longer, give you some more mobility and lock down the enemy, and of course massively boost your melee output against your opponent. You also get 4 enhancements with the faction, of course, and you can, as with any other army, take 3 of them. They do come with a cost, but they are all relatively cheap apart from one of them, which is well worth the cost anyway. Perdition's Edge is 15 points, and this gives the character who takes it +1 to their strength and AP, and also +1 to their attacks if you've opted for the Suffer Not the Unclean to Live vow. So a character can potentially have +1 strength, +1 AP, +1 attacks, and lethal hits, which will make them a frankly terrifying combat threat with the war gear options a lot of your characters have as well. Sigismund's Seal is an enhancement which is boosted by the Accept Any Challenge No Matter the Odds vow. It does cost you 20 points, but it gives your melee weapons +1 attack, and then with the Accept Any Challenge vow also gets you critical hits on a 5+, so their sustained hits will now proc on 5s, and with that extra bonus attack gives you a lot of chances for spiking quite high actually, and getting an absurd number of hits into things like a big enemy unit of Orc Boys or Gaunts or Guardsmen. So it's a little bit pricier, but into the right opponent can make your character very, very scary. The Witch Seeker Bolts are a cheap 10 points, but they are arguably the least useful out of the enhancements. They are a ranged weapon buff, which your army just isn't really all that keen on generally. You much prefer to be in melee. What this does is it gives the bearers ranged weapons precision, Anti-Psyker 4+, and Devastating Wounds. And if you have picked the Abhor the Witch, Destroy the Witch vow, you also get to re-roll hit and wound rolls against Psyker units. So in terms of the rules you get, this is very, very, very good. It's just that most of the time you would prefer to have a more melee-focused character, in my opinion. There are some okay options for this though. If you take this on something like a Tech Marine with their Forge Bolter, that will be getting you 3 shots that will be hitting on 2s with a reroll, wounding Marine Psychers on 3s with a reroll, and of course any 4+ being Devastating Wounds with the Forge Bolter having a flat 2 damage. So you could be getting up to 6 mortal wounds onto an enemy Psyker pretty reliably, which isn't bad, and you could make for a semi-reasonable Psyker Hunter if you did want to go that route. But I personally think the best of the enhancements is the last one. This is the priciest one. This is the 35-point Tannhauser's Bones. This is just incredibly good. It gives the character with it the ability to shrug off half the damage from incoming attacks, which is already just insane. Dropping things like 2 damage attacks down to 1 is really good. But again, making scarier, 8 damage attacks from bigger things like scary monsters and knights and that sort of thing going down to 4 means that it is so much harder to just one-shot your hero now. But then on top of that, in the Uphold the Honor of the Emperor vow, the bearer and his unit also get a 5-up Feel No Pain instead of the 6-up from the vow. So now you can have a load of 3-up save, 2 wound models with a 5-up Feel No Pain, which is a really nice extra layer of durability. And if you put it on things like Terminators, they are just never going to die when they have a character with this enhancement joining their ranks. So all in all, some great enhancements and some really good stratagems. But what about the actual units that the Black Templars get access to themselves? Well, thanks to their semi-recent refresh, we've got a load of gorgeous new models to look through, but starting things off is one of the named characters, Chaplain Grimaldus. He is 120 points, and that nets you a toughness 4 profile with a 3-up save, 4 wounds, a 4-up invuln, and also a base 5-up Feel No Pain, so he's not too shabby in terms of durability. He also has 3 Cenobite Servitors with him, which basically give him an extra 3 token wounds with the same 3-up save. So he does essentially have 7 wounds in total, which is nice. He does get to lead a few options of units, which are pretty much the same across all the characters in your faction, to be honest. He gets to lead Intercessors, Infernus Marines, Assault Intercessors, or the slightly more Black Templar focused Sword Brethren or Primaris Crusader squads. And then when he does that, he gives them rerolls to hit on their melee attacks with Litanies of the Devout, which is great if you need to use Oath of Moment elsewhere on another enemy. And then he can also pick a Temple Relic as long as one of your Servitors is alive in your command phase, and you get to pick one of 3 abilities to buff him and his unit until your next command phase. These abilities are called the Relics of the Emperor Ascendant, and he can either use the Banner of the Fallen Crusaders, which gives him and his unit the ability to charge even if they've advanced or fallen back, which is a huge boost in a melee-focused army. It's going to mean him and his squad can get into combat really quickly and really reliably, so this is a brilliant one to have in your back pocket. Remnant of the Fallen Temple is a great durability one. If you are expecting a lot of damage coming into you, it gives your whole unit the 5-up Feel No Pain for the turn to help them stick around that much longer if you are being shot or being charged by your opponent. And then the last is the Scepter of Anointing. This is also really good, and if you are in combat, maybe the one to pick. It just gives your unit +1 AP. So again, making your chainswords -2 AP, potentially bumping Grimaldus himself up to a whopping -3 AP. So him and his unit, they are just going to be able to cleave through enemies really, really easily with this. In terms of his weapons, he is more melee than shooting, of course, although he does have a plasma pistol for a bit of token extra damage at 12 inches or when you are in an ongoing combat. But his main weapon is his Artificer Crozius. This nets him a solid 5 attacks, which are strength 6, -2 AP and a flat 2 damage. So it's not the most terrifying profile, but it can make him really good into enemy marines. With the Scepter of Anointing buff, he can kill off about 3 marines by himself, not even taking into account the rest of his unit. So he is fairly choppy against infantry, and of course with some of the other detachment buffs you can get, he can also do a good bit of work into tougher vehicles or hordes with that choice of lethal or sustained hits for him. Overall, I think he's just a good pick. He's not too pricey, he brings some great options to get into combat quicker or have a more durable unit, or just to flat out make them killier in melee with better AP. So he does have a lot of flexibility, and I just think he is really worth considering if you want a unit that you want those buffs on in your army. Next up is the granddaddy of the chapter himself. No, I'm not talking about Rogel Dorn, his crusading son, High Marshal Helbrecht. Helbrecht is again just an all-round solid character, and he's got that stunning new model which fits in so well with the Black Templars. I would say he's almost worth taking just for the model alone, but on the rules front he is also relatively decent. He's again a nice cheap 120 points, which again nets you that toughness 4 profile, this time with a 2-up save, 4-up invuln, and also a slightly better 5 wounds. He can, like Grimaldus, join the usual suspects of Assault Intercessors as well as the Primaris Crusaders or the Sword Brethren squads, and he does buff all of those units really quite well. Crusade of Wrath gives him and his unit +1 strength and crits on 5+ when they're in melee, tying you really well with those detachment rules for sustained or lethal hits and giving you a load more mileage out of either of those options. He also has the High Marshal rule, which means at the start of the fight phase he can pick an enemy unit and you roll a dice, and on a 2 to 3 they take D3 mortal wounds, on a 4 to 5 they take a flat 3, and on a 6 they take a massive D3 plus 3 mortal wounds. So before combat even begins, he can potentially wipe out 6 Orc Boys or 3 Marines, or even a couple of Custodies if you are really lucky. So that is a very good rule. It is quite reliably doing at least D3 as well, because it only fails on a 1. So this is a really important rule to remember, because it will boost the output of Helbrecht and his squad quite drastically every single fight phase, and could net you an extra, 10 plus mortal wounds onto an enemy unit over the course of the entire game. But aside from that, his own output weapon-wise is also fairly terrifying. He's got a combi weapon named Ferocity, which is a reasonably solid bit of shooting. It's 2 shots that hit on 2s. They are strength 5, -1 AP, 2 damage, with anti-infantry 4+ and devastating wounds. So he can somewhat reliably kill off a marine or 2 as you're moving up towards combat. But then when he does make the charge in, this is where he gets really good, because his Sword of the High Marshals is just brilliant. He can swing it either 1- or 2-handed, with the 1-handed option being a seriously good sweep profile, 12 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 6 or strength 7 when he's leading a unit, -3 AP and 1 damage, or the 2-handed profile, which is only 6 attacks, but now is going to be a whopping strength 8 or strength 9 in a unit, minus 3 AP, and flat 3 damage. So he will likely kill 2 custodian guards by himself with those attacks, or even into lighter vehicles like rhinos and the like. He can do over half their wounds in one go. Against weaker chaff units as well, the one-handed profile is really good. This gets him about 6 or 7 dead orcs if he goes into a squad of them, which is really good. So he is just solid into basically anything, whether it is hordes of enemies or tougher elite infantry or even lighter vehicles. He can do reasonably well. And for a mere 120 points, he gets you some very solid melee, some really good force multiplying for the unit he joins, and I just think he is all round a great worthwhile pick for a Templars army. The Emperor's Champion is our next character. Again, with his brilliant new model, he is a worthy pick just for the sheer style he brings. He is also a much cheaper 75 points though, so he can really quite easily fit into a force without too much difficulty if you do want to add him. And like Helbrecht, he has a toughness 4, 5 wound, 2 up save, and 4 up invuln profile, so he's not exactly squishy either. He can join the melee focus units of the Assault or regular Intercessors, Primaris Crusader or Sword Brethren squads, but also cheekily regular Stern Guard squads, so that is an extra option for him, although I imagine you will probably mostly put him with things like the Crusaders or the Sword Brethren. Now, where he differs is that he doesn't bring any specific buffs for his unit, he is mainly just boosting his own output. Skillful Parry means that once per phase, he can change the damage of a melee attack to 0 after he's failed a save, so if he gets charged by Abaddon or a Primarch or a Knight, he can make it that little bit trickier for their scary 3 or 4 or 6 damage attacks to kill him off. Doesn't make him invincible, but it does add a good chunk to his durability alongside his 4-up invuln. He can also make himself better at wounding enemy characters and their units with Sigismund's Heir, which gives him, and only him, +1 to wound against character units. So this doesn't go to the rest of his squad, which is a shame, it is just his attacks, but still, it is going to help him hunt down characters and their bodyguards. In terms of the damage he can do, he's got his weapon, the Black Sword, which, like Helbrecht, has 2 profiles, although they are not quite as good. Sweep is the anti-horde one. It's got 10 attacks that are strength 6, minus 2 AP, and 1 damage, so not bad at wounding things like Orc or Nid or Horde units on 2s if they've got a character attached to them. But then the strike profile is a scarier strength 8, minus 3 AP, and 3 damage, and it has 6 attacks that hit on 2s, but it also has precision. So now you can really scare enemy characters. That is a lot of damage that could be going into them, and with just average rolling, he could be doing over 6 wounds to something like a Custodes Shield Captain, so even if they are safely hidden in a squad of Custodian Guard, he could still very easily kill off that Shield Captain in just 1 round of combat, which is insanely good output. It's worth bearing in mind that he's not great at buffing your army elsewhere, and that is why he is so much cheaper than Helbrecht and Grimaldus. But if you need an enemy character dead and you know your opponent is running a character-heavy army, he is a very good way at getting rid of them, and he does it for a reasonable cost as well. The Black Templars also get 2 new non-named characters in the Castellan and the Marshal. The Castellan is the cheaper of the 2 at 65 points and is fairly squishy with toughness 4, a 3-up save, and 4 wounds but no invuln, so he really does want to be hidden in a squad for that extra protection. He's like a lieutenant in that he can join a unit alongside a captain or a chapter master, so you can join your Marshal or Helbrecht to something like a Sword Brethren squad and still add this guy as well, which is quite nice. He gives his unit the ability to fall back and still shoot or charge thanks to target priority, which is a good bit of extra mobility to the unit, and he also gives his unit lethal hits. So that is really good. It does mean that taking him is a bit more annoying if you wanted to take the Suffer Not the Unclean to Live vow, but you can instead get a squad potentially now with sustained and lethal hits much more easily, or with lethal hits and the 6-up feel no pain vow a bit more easily if you wanted to do that, so he can be pretty great from that perspective. He also has some okay output. He's got the option for a combi weapon for some anti-infantry and devastating wounds goodness, but it is only 1 shot and 1 damage, so it's not really going to do much. But in melee, he has a master-crafted power weapon, which he can swap for a chainsword, but you probably never will. The power weapon is 1 less attack with only 4, but it is strength 5, minus 2 AP and 2 damage, which is just way better than the chainsword, and it makes him a fairly decent anti-marine unit, and also deceptively okay against tougher things too, with those lethal hits. On top of that, as a non-named character, he can go for some of the enhancements, so you could potentially get him even more melee output with things like Sigismund's Seal for that extra attack, and also getting both sustained and lethal hits on 5s if you do go for the accept any challenge vow. The Marshal is your captain equivalent. He is a bit pricier at 80 points, and over the Castellan he has 1 extra wound at 5 wounds and also a 4-up invuln, but still the same 3-up armor save. He can also join the same list of units, and he brings the regular captain buff of Rites of Battle, which lets you use a stratagem for 1 command point less per battle round. The index does still show the old rule, but as of the latest data slate, it is now that you just reduce the cost of a stratagem by 1, and it can be used on any stratagems, not just battle tactic ones. So this is great for getting the most out of your 6 stratagems and really getting your unit into combat or making them much scarier when they are there. So it is a very strong, very useful ability to have. He also has the Finest Hour, which is a once per battle ability, but gives him at the start of the fight phase the option to add 3 to his attacks and give them the devastating wounds rule. Considering he has a decent mastercrafted power weapon already, this can make him really quite scary, going up to 9 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 5, minus 2 AP, 2 damage, and having devastating wounds is really good. It's going to net you about 4 dead marines from his attacks, or even more if he is in a unit with, say, a Castellan and ends up having both lethal and sustained hits proccing on 5s, for instance. He can combo with a few things really quite well, and I think for that 80 points he is still a relatively cheap way to get a solid melee character that has some great force multiplying potential with your stratagems, thanks to the Rites of Battle rule. So again, a really worthwhile character and HQ to bring if you don't want to go for one of the named ones. And that's all the characters for the Templars, but they do also get their own selection of unique units. And starting things off is the not going to be used all that much often, but older non-Primaris Crusader squad. These guys are 85 points for 1 Sword Brother and 4 Initiates, or you can bring up to 9 Initiates for 150 points, or you can instead bring 1 Sword Brother, 4 Initiates, and 5 Neophytes for 135 points, or you can go all in and go for 1 Sword Brother, 9 Initiates, and 10 Neophytes for 270 points. The Neophytes only have a 4-up save, but they are still 2 wounds, whilst all the other models in the unit are the regular 2 wound, 3-up save Marine profile. So for 270 points, that can net you a whopping 40 wounds, which is around 6 points per wound. So it's actually not terrible, despite half of them only having a 4-up save. They are very melee focused, with the ability to re-roll advance and charge rolls thanks to Righteous Zeal, which is very good with the number of attacks they can throw out in combat, and they do also have a pretty wild selection of options. The Sword Brother can have Lightning Claws, or an option of power weapons, power fists, thunder hammers, and a variety of pistols as well, which is quite decent, whilst all of the Neophytes can swap their bolters for shotguns for some better close range shooting, and then the Initiates can be made even more melee focused by swapping their bolt guns for a chainsword, giving them that extra attack and a bonus AP in melee, so they really can be a bit of a horde melee powerhouse. The newer Primaris Crusader squad is up next. They've got a much more limited loadout. They come in either a unit of 10 with 1 Sword Brother, 5 Initiates, and 4 Neophytes for 140 points, or you can basically double that, going to 1 Sword Brother, 11 Initiates, and 8 Neophytes for 280 points. They do get the same reroll advance and charge rolls, but they do also on top of that have a very welcome 6-inch scout move, which can help them get up into melee that little bit more easily. In terms of options though, as I said, they do have a lot less. The Sword Brother can only swap his bolt pistol for a pyre pistol, which is essentially a hand flamer, but he does have to keep his power weapon. And then the Initiates, they can all be more melee focused by swapping their bolt rifle to a heavy bolt pistol and chainsword, whilst up to 2 for each 10 models in the unit can take a power fist. So in a full unit of 20 guys, you could potentially get 4 power fists in this unit, so that's not terrible. The Neophytes can swap their bolt pistol and chainsword for a melee downgrade to just a close combat weapon, but then the Neophyte sidearm is a bit better with 1 extra shot over the bolt pistol and also the assault rule. So this could potentially be an option if you wanted to have this unit move around the board a bit more and still throw out a little bit of firepower into the enemy. But for me personally, I would just keep as many power fists and chainswords on this squad as possible and make them a big, scary melee blob of death. For 280 points, you are looking at 7 points per wound, which again isn't bad. And as I said, they can be quite a big, scary blob of a melee with 40 wounds as well. So getting into combat relatively intact a lot of the time, I think, especially thanks to that 6-inch scout and the ability to re-roll charges, as well potentially as advance and charge if they've got someone like Grimaldus with them. So they really can be quite nasty. That is a lot of light anti-chaff output, but also potentially 12 strength 8 -2 AP, 2 damage attacks from the power fists as well, alongside something like lethal hits or even sustained hits. They are going to be doing quite a bit of work. The more elite option is the Sword Brethren. These come in a unit of 5 or 10 for either 150 or 300 points, so they are a little bit pricey at 30 points per model, but they've got a 3-up save and a 3 wounds, so they are essentially Blade Guard equivalent, just one without an inrun. I would say they're probably more akin to something like the Dark Angel's Companions. They do have quite a cool rule in Vow Sworn Bladesmen, which lets you at the start of the fight phase choose to either give their melee weapons +1 attack or +1 damage, which can be really terrifying with their options available. Giving them up to 2 damage on things like their power weapons or 3 damage on their Thunderhammers can make them a genuinely scary threat. They do, however, have quite a limited loadout. So any of them can take a power weapon, and then 1 in 5 can have a Thunderhammer, 2 in 5 can take a pyre pistol for some anti-horde firepower. The Castellan, who's the sergeant basically, can take a master crafted power weapon and also a combi weapon, and then 1 in 5 can take twin lightning claws. So you unfortunately can't go all lightning claws or all Thunderhammers, which is a shame, but a regular squad will likely have 3 Thunderhammer attacks, 5 Lightning Claw attacks, 8 power weapon, and 4 mastercrafted power weapon attacks, which could be bumped to +1 attack each, or the even better, in my opinion, +1 damage on all those attacks. So this is going to make a significant difference into things like Marines or Terminators or vehicles, whereas if you are charging into a blob of Gaunts or 20 Orc Boys, then maybe the extra attack will be the better pick. They can be quite squishy because they don't really have any innate defense apart from those 3 wounds and the 3-up save, so they can be a little bit of a glass cannon, but they do have the potential for some really amazing damage output, and even a unit of just 5 will be killing off a solid couple of Terminators in combat with the +1 damage, or wiping out nearly 10 Orc Boys if you instead go for the +1 attack option. With added character support on top of that, they can of course just get even better, so they are good and they are definitely a worthy pick if you have a target in mind for them. You just do need to be careful about getting them into combat because they can die very, very quickly if you're not careful. The last few units are of course the Black Templars vehicles that we mentioned earlier. We won't go through these one by one because they are 99% the same as the Marine versions. The only real difference is that they are a tiny bit pricier by 10 points across the board. So for instance, the regular Marine Gladiator tanks are 160 points, the Black Templar variants are 170, and that is because they all come stock with an additional multi-melter. So essentially, for those 10 extra points, you get an extra 2 strength 9 minus 4 AP d6 damage shots with the Melter 2 rule. That is all. There's nothing else new or extra. It has just... Melter's always been an option for the Black Templars, so they have updated the rules and the points to reflect that addition to their vehicles. And essentially, you get a slightly shootier, slightly pricier tank option for the Black Templars. It's not bad in some cases. Some of the units do benefit that quite well. Something like the Executioner's +1 to hit against half strength units makes the multi-melter now hit on 2s, which is nice, whilst the Lancers rerolled 1 hit, 1 wound and 1 damage roll can be nice to get more out of that d6 damage from the multi-melter if you didn't need to use it on the laser destroyer, for instance. So it's not all bad, and I would say arguably probably worth that extra 10 points most of the time. Just don't forget about it, because it is quite easy to do unless you have played the Black Templars and you remember that they've also got a multi-melter on a lot of their Primaris vehicles. And that is the Black Templars. As a Dark Angel fan, I've always loved their knightly Crusader style aesthetic as well. They are very much similar but slightly different to the Dark Angels. They're more sort of Templar focused rather than monk focused like the Dark Angels, but they both do have that grim, dark, knightly vibe. And I really do love all of their relatively new models. They've got a really good set of strong, flexible rules to enjoy. And if you want a more gothic, grim, dark, Templar themed melee focused army, and you aren't a fan of armies like the Blood Angels or the Space Wolves, the Templars are a very good one to consider. But as always, what do you make of the Black Templars Index, and which of their vows do you end up using the most? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.